I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I am Ben Detrick. Jordan Redaelli is on vacation, and Andrew Kuo, no matter what, takes 0 days off.
Feeling good, man. Trying to stay upbeat. I'm enjoying my self-care. A little bit of tranquility over here. How you feeling, man?
Well, spiritually broken from 3 straight days of podcasting. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, just shattered by all the takes that have been yanked from my corpse.
I literally take no days off, so this is just regular stuff for me. You, on the other hand, pick your battles.
I take days
many
off.
Days. Yes. Are you tanking?
Always.
Respect.
For a better future. So we're back again because that's the kind of friends we are. In a time of need, here comes Cookies with more content.
Yeah, man. If you're sitting at home, we figured we might as well fill your ears with some influential hotness, some take-itude.
So yesterday felt like the day when everything crystallized as being real in terms of the way that coronavirus is going to affect our lives for the immediate future. The night before, we had the startling revelation of the NBA season being suspended, along with other sports. And that all of it felt very shocking and new. And yesterday, it had a sense of inevitability, where we're like, this is the new normal. This is how we live now. How are you adjusting, Andrew Kuo?
I'm trying to stay upbeat. I think it's important for me personally to not go into the rabbit hole of pessimism or the worst case scenario kind of fan fiction I do in my head all the time. I'm worried about our city, man, a little bit. I'm worried about all of our favorite places like Chinese restaurants and our friends' bars and restaurants that our friends started and are successful, but we'll have a really tough time weathering what is to come for them. And I remember one time I moved to the west side to be close to my favorite lunch spot. It was on Greenwich Street, Greenwich and Spring. And I love this lunch spot so much that I decided to move my studio near there because it was such like a active community place. And
you're, of course, referring to Arby's.
Arby's, right? And it was awesome. And the blackout happened and they lost their freezer. And they were like, we'll be back. Don't worry. We have a plan. And the plan didn't work out and they closed down. And I thought that was really sad that the city didn't come through and help them enough. I think they got some assistance, but it was just over. And I spoke to the owner as he was rolling down the gates and he just said he couldn't sustain that financial hit. And I worry about all these places that make, not to be hokey about it, but make our city awesome. And the only thing left standing will be Chase Banks.
I have the exact same concerns. And it's primarily because we've seen a shift in the kind of businesses that can survive in New York City over the last 10 years, 20 years, etc. And we saw multinational, incredibly powerful and wealthy corporations glom up a lot of choice real estate. And rents soared. And in terms of commercial spaces, we're talking about Bedford Avenue, in Brooklyn, having vacant storefronts everywhere, but rent might be $25,000 a month.
It's wild.
So the small operators and little businesses and the places that give a neighborhood or a city character have struggled as it is. And they're the exact same ones that may not have the financial bandwidth, so to speak, to survive for a couple months with no revenue. Whereas if you are a massive company, you're going to lose money, but you're huge. And the same way you can have a loss leader in these exact same real estate conditions, and it allows you to survive this kind of situation for a few months, where someone who is just scraping by but is a valuable part of the community might be totally screwed.
Yeah, and I'm not even counting out the people who work for MSG, who work for Chase. You know, all those people in there, I have sympathy for too. A lot of sympathy. Like, they need to keep their jobs, and the Wells Fargo employs people that need that paycheck, and I get that. And the Republican kind of White House point of view of capitalism makes sense in theory, but when something like this happens, I love people who change their minds, I always say, and I wish we could bend to our needs as a community and say, you know, maybe the strong do survive, and maybe if there's a demand for a restaurant, it will survive by itself. But this is an anomaly, and we need to just help people have a chance at capitalism.
Well, you know, I don't believe in any of that malarkey anyway.
Of capitalism?
So, I mean, I believe it in some degrees, but I mean, the idea that it's going to work out under capitalism, that it works in theory, the theory doesn't actually hold water either, though.
The theory is sound, but I don't believe it in practice. But, I mean, communism is sound, but I don't believe it in practice.
I'm not even advocating for either of these extremes. I'm just saying that...
Oh, for the first time ever.
I'm saying
Nice.
The idea that, like, in theory, small businesses would be able to thrive. It's like, not really. You know, not specifically. When you look at...
Why not, though?
Well, when rents all soar and small
But that's a
companies,
product of something, right? Like, in theory, rent shouldn't soar is maybe my point. That's just a result of another theory.
Well, anyhow, without going down that entire rabbit hole, I'm saying that small and valuable staples of a community right now who may have been teetering on the balance and trying to decide whether it was worth sticking around and fighting the good fight might be willing to wave the white flag now, looking at the next few months.
Yeah, and, you know, when people lament the end of diners, that was a slow crawl where the change was harder to detect because it wasn't sudden. This might be a little sudden. So, you know, I think of all the places I used to go to as a kid in Chinatown, and they were suffering for a month. The New York Times wrote that people weren't going in to eat at these places because they thought they would catch the virus by eating food prepared by people who look like they might have the virus. And I don't know how WoHop is going to survive. New York Noodle Town, all these things that have been a staple in my life forever.
But also, to be fair, I think a lot of this is the question of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. If this is a month and a half, then most of them will be fine.
I hope
if
so.
This is,
that's
well,
tough.
if they can't survive a month and a half by closing their doors and saying to their staff, you know, we'll just try to look out for you a little bit, then like they're in dire straits as it is. That's kind of what I was saying before.
Wow, look at the capitalist. The capitalist is logged on.
No, I'm saying they were not long for this earth if they can't last a month.
Survival of the fittest, I see.
I'm not advocating in favor of it. I'm saying the reality is if you can't stand a month without business, then you were probably on the edge of failure to begin with.
Oh.
And of course that's bad. And I'm talking about those specific kinds of places, but I don't know if, say, Noodle Town or WoHop that has been successful would be able to, or would be forced to close after a month. I'm worried about the ones that are on that edge to begin with.
Right. Well, that was the reason I told the story of that lunch spot. All they did was they lost their freezer, and it seemed benign at the time. They're like, it's just like a week's worth of food. We got this. They couldn't climb out from under it. It was wild.
I'm certainly saying that is going to happen to some places,
Yeah.
and that is bad. I'm more saying that the successful staples can probably say for a month, look, we're shutting down. We're not going to pay people. We're not going to incur any expenses from ordering food. We're going to shut the doors. And like the owners themselves will basically just have to pay rent for a month. The people who are going to be hurt are the people who aren't going to be able to work. I'm saying those places probably will not just immediately shut their doors forever because they don't have rent to pay for 1 month. That's going to happen to some people. And I really do wonder, if this is for 3 months, that equation changes. If it's 6 months, then we're talking about something completely different.
I get worried after a week. I think no business after a week is you get into the red with all these businesses.
Oh, for sure. I'm more saying that if you just say no one's coming in, we're shutting down for the next 3 weeks, then like if you're a restaurant, you're not, other than rent, you don't have any expenses.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm more pessimistic than you, but that's fair. I like what you're laying down. That's a bit of positivity there. I got a text late last night from a buddy who owns a bar that I love so much. He was like, "Yo, it's empty. Come through. I'm working." And I was like, I'm not doing that right now. And I didn't know what to do. Like, I want to go to all my favorite restaurants. Maybe I'll get some takeout today and pick it up. But I was like, I'm not drinking with 10 people right now.
I'm worried about nightlife, though.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's why I brought it up. He's like, yo, it's 1 a.m. It's like, come through. I'm like, I'm going to sleep for a week, at least.
There just needs to be some sort of national relief fund. And if we can pump 500 billion to 1.5 trillion into the stock market to stabilize it.
But how are we going to pay for it then?
How are we going to pay? How could it be done? Phone call. Yeah, 1.5 trillion. Done.
Although the stock market is very, very important. So it's as important as we think it is. So whatever.
But my point is that really does show what our priorities are. And in a world in which we cared about things equally, right, there would be ways to say, you can submit your losses for this period of time, and we will subsidize you staying open so you don't crumble. Yeah, if you're a bar that has this amount of profit and this is the way that your finances work, and we can see all of this, and your business just goes down the tubes, we will help you in this period of need that is hopefully, as I said, a month or two. Yeah,
and there's ways to do that. There's interest-free loans. There's tax abatements. There's just cash. But, that takes time, and the process is, as we know, it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of people not willing to give up money and a lot of fraud. So I'm worried about that window. The bull market is funny because this is when people get rich. And I think when the stock market is this low, like I always think to myself, I wish I had money, because now is how people create wealth, and everyone should just buy tech stocks right now, and you're looking pretty good, and that's kind of melancholy to me a little bit.
But back to your point about New York City nightlife and restaurants. Those are two very different industries right now, I think, because restaurants are thriving, I would say, for the most part. It is not right now. Not
in the last 5 years.
I don't know. I think it's a fine time.
Oh, I disagree. I think
I know it's a struggle. I know it's hard. I know the margins are slim, but people go to restaurants. Nightlife in New York has kind of vanished on a large scale in Manhattan.
Yeah, that's true too, because I think because of many factors.
Yeah, I'm not saying people are getting rich off of restaurants. I'm saying restaurants are opening, they are crowded, people go out to eat.
Yeah.
But there is not a nightlife scene. And when you say, okay, here's coronavirus, you can still go to a restaurant. People may not do it as much, but you can go to a restaurant. You can order food. Yeah. People are out to eat. People are not in the club.
I always say the hardest business to run in New York City is a restaurant over a club owner, because in clubs at least you get to sell alcohol, which is pretty cheap. Restaurants, I think we're way past the golden age of that market. But to your point, like I always wonder, we are no longer young bucks. If we had Lil in our rap names, we'd probably have dropped them by now. But we were in an era, and we sound old. I sound old when I say this. We were in an era when nightlife was pretty cool. It was happening. There was things to do every night, and I every time I'm around somebody much younger than me, I ask them where they go, and they're like, "Oh, I go to my friend's house, and I like pills and I like smoking, and we listen to music and watch movies." I'm like, "Do you go out and dance around other people?" And they're like, "Yeah, we do, but not that often." I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting, because when me and you were around, that was a nightly thing with many options."
It's really remarkable if you look back at the early 2000s, mid 2000s, how many venues there were. There was something every night, but there were also, in that era, different nights at different clubs. So Wednesday would be this here, Thursday would be a different kind of music at this place. And you went to so many different venues in a way that now I feel like people just kind of go to the same bar, the same restaurant, the same place all the time. And then, find a house party or an event that's in like a little pop-up place or whatever. But back then it was very much a schedule, like Wednesdays at table 50 or, spa on this day.
Yeah, and I remember when people would book parties against other parties knowing that everyone would be out. And it would just be like a crawl, like, well, this is not really for me. Let's go to the next spot. Let's go to the next spot. And it was a completely different way to experience New York City, I think.
For sure. And that does not exist. And maybe we're mourning a nightlife that has already disappeared and saying that coronavirus is going to really put the stake through the heart of something that isn't even here anyway.
Yeah. Shout out to Marnie the dog, who passed away this week. And I remember meeting Marnie's eventual owner, or mother, whatever you want to call that. And she was doing an article, I believe, for the Village Voice, where she was going to go to a party every night for 30 days. And that just kind of lined up with the era where I was throwing many parties a week. And I would see her 3 or 4 times a week. And 2 weeks into it, I was like, "How you hanging in there?" And she was like, "It's exhausting." Like, I am not having fun anymore, but I have to finish this article because I don't want to waste the time I've already wasted. But at least she said there was different things to see. She was like, the music is different. I'll go from a rap party to indie rock dance party to a new wave party to a Smiths night. All those things were available, like bottle service to a dingy club bar. There was a texture to it that was cool. In Manhattan, that doesn't quite exist anymore. I think it's probably happening in Ridgewood somewhere, but I don't know of it.
The biggest issue that I can detect as someone who does not go out as frequently as I did even a few years ago is that there's been sort of an LAification of New York City, and that it's small, different cities that are a little ways apart versus it being centralized in downtown Manhattan, where, in our heyday, if you will, you could bounce around to 4 different places, and each one was a 5-minute cab ride apart. And you could hit up a bunch of parties, and you'd find out, oh, this place is better. All right, I'll go see you there. Meet up with your friends. Oh, let's head to this spot. Oh, there's an after party. We're walking. And now I think it's spread out enough that where it's, okay, here's something in Ridgewood. Here's something in Greenpoint. Here's something in Bushwick. Here's Gowanus. Oh, this is down in Tribeca. This is in the city. I don't think you have the options of mobility in the way that you did even 5 to 10 years ago.
Yo, China Chalet is far away, man.
Yeah, man.
It is far, and I really love that place. But if you just wanted to walk there, I'm like, cool, that's half an hour, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot of boring walking to China Chalet.
But if you're in Bushwick and someone's like, all right, people are going to China Chalet, should we? You're like, that's far.
That's an hour.
And it's expensive, especially when they tacked on the new subcharges on that. If you get picked up in a cab in Manhattan or dropped off in Manhattan, it's like another $3 or $4. So that really stymies the whole jump in a cab and quickly go somewhere else. Because if you're young and broke, that changes a $5, $6 ride into like an $11 ride.
And let's really talk about it, because now that kids aren't drinking as much as they used to, as we used to, just beers wise, they're expensive now because places have to make up for that difference. So you walk into a place like China Chalet after spending an hour in a cab, waiting online, calling your homie who gets you in, and then you wait 20 minutes to get a drink just to sip on something. It's like $15.
China Chalet is not $15
For a mixed drink, for like a whiskey, whiskey on the rocks.
It could be.
It's less than 20, which is cheap.
I mean, China Chalet is not egregiously expensive by the comparisons of New York City nightlife.
Yo, but you have 3 drinks and you pay for your friend. That's $40.
That's true. I'm just saying, if we're gonna look for expensive spots, China Chalet at least is a bit forgiving.
Oh yeah, that's better than a club for sure. But back in the day, $2 beers.
But it is via map. If you were in Bushwick and going to China Chalet, it is over 6 miles. And right now, traffic is obviously different now than it would be at, say, 1 in the morning. But it's 38 minutes via car. That's like a $45 cab ride.
Yo, I've had some good times at China Chalet, man.
Great spot. Shout out to China Chalet. No disrespect.
Yeah.
I'm here besmirching their prices.
And it's funny, right? And I thought that was going to be the model moving forward because it's an operating restaurant during the day for Wall Street people. And at night, the owners rent it out to kids who want to throw parties. And they're cool about it. And they clean up and serve dim sum the next morning. And I thought that was going to be the model moving forward, like Red Egg. Remember the Red Egg days?
Of course. You had Madame Wong's and Red Egg and China Chalet. And there was a whole sort of trend towards finding places in Chinatown that were restaurants during the day and then converting them into dance clubs with red lighting and fog machines and Travis Bass and Simonez. And those parties were really good. They were very fun parties for a couple of years. Shout
out to my Chinese kings for keeping New York nightlife afloat. But like their Chinese culture by nature is just like, oh yeah, we can make a little extra money and you guys would take care of shit. All right, let's do it. I know, and I don't know. It doesn't really. Our buddies opened up Cookie Soup's Classic Legends. Opened up this place, The Dance, and unfortunately their program is changing quicker than we thought it would. But it was on Lafayette Street, and it felt like it could be something that worked or it could not be something that worked, because I don't know many kids who would want to go to Lafayette Street to see a new artist and pay that amount of money for drinks.
I wish that The Dance had worked, because there's something about Lafayette Street, right, that specific area that I really like, and it feels like New York City. And you've got the Public Theater there. You have Butter, which is reopening as another club. You have The Dance. You have Indochine. It's like it has a mystique for
St. Mark's.
Yeah, for a New York City environment that's still like it. I don't know. It has a real vibe to it that feels cool when you're around there in Astor Place.
I've boomeranged back to loving all the gutter punks, the crusties that hang out on St. Mark's. Because growing up, it was like that's where you get all your Doc Martens and your Black Flag bootleg VHSs. And it was a whole scene because there was a methadone clinic there. So it was a gutter punk kind of hub in America. And people would come here on a bus with their dogs and plop down and score drugs, basically. And it changed into basically a little Asian city, and there's Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants. It's like a little Asia for NYU, and you still see some gutter punks around then because of like the fumes of what it used to be, and I love them. It's amazing. It's like
my understanding of the gutter punk tour schedule was that they would spend the winters in New Orleans. Then as the weather started getting warmer, they would head north up to like Myrtle Beach area.
Portland was one of the stops. It's a trifecta, right? There's 3 spots.
Then there was New York City, then there was Maine.
Oh, see, I knew of a different one, but I thought it was...
Are you saying Portland on the West Coast?
Portland, Berkeley, New York, I thought was the 3 spots that they just travel. And in between, they would have experiences and communities and all that. But
that could also totally be true. For some reason, I was told that it was a the East Coast route was New Orleans, Myrtle Beach,
Totally.
New York, and then something like Maine during like the bowels of the summer.
I mean, I used to really love this zine called Comet Bus, and he was a part of that community, and he used to detail these trips from all these places. Ended up being the drummer of a great band called Pinhead Gunpowder that the singer of Green Day was in. Kind of like unheralded, awesome band. I think on Lookout. But
In other gutter punk lore, I was told that the reason that they love having dogs is twofold. One is that they get more change from people because people are more sympathetic to an animal than a human.
makes sense.
And secondly, that the cops can't arrest you if you have a dog unless they call another cop or like the dog catcher or something along those lines that can actually take a dog into custody. And a lot of times, if you're a police officer, it's not worth the hassle.
Because all they're doing is loitering usually, right?
I mean, it might be, say, petty larceny, but if they have a dog, then the cop has to wait there and book the guy and then get someone to come and get the dog. So they might just say, like, here's a ticket, stay out of the store.
I don't support petty larceny, but I support that move of having a dog. So Officer Mitchell can't just break your ankles and
There will be
be a
no
prom
Donovan
king.
Mitchell slander today. Get well soon, Donovan.
Did you hear that there's like
Read the room, Quo.
there's drama in Utah? I did not expect that. According to Woj. Or maybe according to Windhurst.
Well, what we're talking about now is what the hell are basketball content creators going to talk about without basketball? You know, we have an entire industry of podcasts, broadcasts, Twitter feeds, etc., who are about sticking to sports. They love basketball. My question is, Andrew Kuo, unless you are the most influential basketball podcast,
Unless.
do you have the range? Do you have the range to thrive in a coronavirus reality?
Is Stephen A. Smith gonna bloviate about Medicare? Like, that would be amazing. But you know,
Here's Stephen A. Smith on Chinatown pop-ups.
Stephen A. Smith arguing about WOHOP survival, which
Do
I
you
would
have
love
the-
to hear.
Do you have the range?
I think they do. I have ESPN on right now, and they're talking about March Madness, and it's tough, right? Because it's like I don't necessarily want all these guys to talk about things that they're interested in because I might not
Because
be
you
interested
just don't
in
want to
it.
hear about Van Halen albums like for 24 hours a day?
Actually, it was a Stairway to Heaven solo. These are my new humbuckers that I'm playing through a Marshall combo amp. Like, I don't know. This is a question of normalcy, like what I want from, let's say, ESPN daytime, which is like the same show over and over and over. And there's a comfort there. I do appreciate, or I'm curious about, like, what my favorite basketball heads are doing. And sometimes it's very organic, right? Sometimes someone's like, I really am obsessed with restaurants, so let me tell you about, like, this thing. And sometimes it's not organic, like, here's a Led Zeppelin solo that I know how to play on guitar.
But when you said
go ahead.
before, you know, I'm looking at ESPN and they're talking about March Madness. This is fumes, man.
Yeah, man.
We're not talking about when you can still talk about March Madness. We're talking about after that shit has been canceled. It's done.
Yeah.
We can't even talk about it being canceled. It's over. There's no games. We're still talking about like Rudy Gobert right now.
Yeah.
You got one more day to talk about March Madness and Rudy Gobert.
I believe TNT was planning on replaying the All-Star game if they hadn't already, because there was nothing to play, but they had that airtime. Yeah, it's a holding pattern, and we kind of, I always say this, so everything I say is redundant or repetitive.
Absolutely.
But I look to certain people for guidance and to frame things and to talk about how I feel and maybe put it into words that help me. and some people are better at it than others. And when there's things to talk about like games and results and arguments, that all gets washed away. But when there's nothing to talk about, I look towards these people, and it's tough kind of to find a voice. I mean, I'm looking to the leader of our country to say something that makes us feel better, and I can't find it. It's just like
you really were hoping for that.
Well, can somebody? I mean, regardless of Republicans or stupidity or anything, like, you are the president of the United States. Do something. Like, I feel like all he's telling us to do, and
I don't want him to do anything. I want other people to do stuff and him just get out of the way.
He still has power, though. So
I know he does, but I don't want him to actually do anything because it's just going to be like closing the borders. like he doesn't have any solution to anything except for letting less like non-Americans into America.
I mean,
there's no other like even agenda.
But maybe this is my point. He's a very disappointing voice. Extremely disappointing.
I mean, if you put like perhaps the worst possible person into the most powerful position on the planet, there might be some problems.
I admit I did the dumbest thing ever, as I went into some rabbit holes of people who support him during this time, and I kind of read what their point was. And it was just like, imagine if he wasn't president, you would all be dead. I'm like, this is interesting. You should sell this script to somebody. And it's just like, if our great leader wasn't in place, all you guys would be freaking out even more. I'm like, that's a possibility, I suppose, but this is kind of weak sauce, man.
We've seen people who are not typically that politically bent, inclined, oriented, speaking out a little bit, because one, there is a void in things to talk about related to basketball, but also because there is a feeling right now that we are all in this together and that no one is at the wheel. And I'm interested in seeing, and this is related to this idea of what are people going to do during this period of time when stick to sports is not an actual option.
It is
you can't do it. There's no way to do it. Mm-hmm. And people are going to, I think, and I hope, be a little bit more open. And I think that'll be interesting. At the same time, if you want to make good content now that's about basketball, I think we'll see a lot of good interviews. Mm-hmm. I think that's the one resource that people can tap, because players aren't playing and we need people to talk to and things to talk about. So we should see some really interesting and revealing interviews of people about, and I'm talking about basketball.
Like retired Sixers in Miami sipping Merlot.
Exactly. But people have time on their hands. There will be some good interviews. Other than that, though, my general feeling is that we're going to have a lot of people going back and watching games from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and arriving at a similar conclusion that shit is unwatchable. And we will find a newfound respect for the evolution of the game that has put it at this point where it is so excellent and so skillful and so entertaining that when you go back and watch some shit from the early 2000s, and you've been arguing and barking about Ben Simmons not taking open jumpers, and you start seeing 60% of the players on the court refusing to take a 12-footer, and everyone's standing in the lane every time Kobe Bryant or Tracy McGrady or Jerry Stackhouse drives into the paint, there's going to be some newfound respect.
Charles Oakley was the man. Watches one game like, he just was a jerk, I guess. It's like the days when Charles Oakley enforced the Garden. I'm like, oh, no. No, this is not how my memory played it out.
Because I've gone back and watched some of those games, as I'm sure you have and many listeners have, and it is wild.
It is wild.
You're like, they can't shoot. They can't dribble with both hands. The offense is people just standing around and one guy like charge. Everyone just plays like DeMar DeRozan.
Imagine if, I'm trying to think of the worst team in that era. I'm just gonna say it was the Cavs or something. Imagine just putting Giannis Antetokounmpo on that team. We're talking about 10 rings in his prime right now.
However, because there was no shooting back then, it is still a different game in that respect. Because Giannis works today because you can put Brook Lopez a zillion feet away. Back then, they would have had him just running into the post and swarmed every time he touched the ball.
Yeah, and there's different rules, so this gets back into our...
He would have been great, don't get me wrong. He would have been like Shaq in that respect in many ways.
Yeah.
But honestly, man, like the game is so different. It's just
Honestly,
a zillion dudes standing in the paint. It's utterly unwatchable.
Falling down trying to draw offensive fouls. It's like all Rick Smits did. He just like made himself upright and fell. But I like Rick Smits quite a bit. No Rick Smits slander on this pod.
No, never.
But I think this is the difference between influence and actuality, because it's kind of unfair to drop Dion Waiters into 1990 and have him just dominate, because he's a player through a process of evolution. And it's, like antibiotics would have been amazing in 1800, but it takes a while to get there. And but it makes me revisit the intern's take of the 2020 Bucks would just dominate all the greatest teams that you think are good.
Oh, I still believe in that. Yeah. I'm more saying some individual players would succeed in varying ways because of the limitations of teammate skill sets. And this ties into what I believe about Allen Iverson, that he is so emblematic of the early 2000s and iso ball and inefficiency that people view him as a product of that era versus a victim of that era. And when I look at Allen Iverson and I say, a guy who should have been on ball because he was a tremendous passer who was taken off of it, a guy who should have been playing with a spread court was playing with the exact opposite, with 4 non-shooters on the floor standing in the paint. And you put him in a modern offense today in a James Harden or Russell Westbrook role, and he's he is the most unstoppable offensive weapon in the league.
Like Monte Ellis too, more Monte.
but he's James Harden.
Yeah, shout out to Andre Kirilenko, who was a victim of his era.
For sure, that guy was a superstar.
Oh my god, he was so good.
He made one All-Star team, and people viewed him as like a oddity.
Yeah,
just kind of an interesting guy. And you're like, no, he could shoot threes, and he led the league in blocks, but he was a small forward. He was utterly insane.
I always think about the early triple-double guys, the unsung triple-double guys like Ricky Davis and Bob Sura. I'm like, I wonder how they would fare. They seem like, Ricky Davis was so interesting for many other reasons off the court. He was just funny. But I think he tried to manufacture a triple-double by shooting on his own rim.
He sure did.
King behavior. Sire shit. But I think
that was the season before they drafted LeBron. I believe they were tanking hard, and he's like, I'm going to get a triple-double while I'm here.
That's right. They were teammates. Yo, shout out to LeBron, who's been around forever. So I was in my Corona self-care zone. I watched this movie on HBO called Yesterday, and I've been dreading this, but basically, quickly, the premise is a failed songwriter, realizes that in his society, no one has heard of the Beatles and any of their songs. So he gets up there and starts covering songs that he recalls from memory and becomes the biggest pop star of his generation.
And what's this called?
Yesterday, named after the Beatles song Yesterday.
Got it.
Danny Boyle directed it, Trainspotting, people love his stuff, whatever. And I thought it was very Cookies NBA related, man, because there he is 3/4 of the way in the movie, top of the world, and he plays back in the USSR for a bunch of screaming kids, and they're just like, who is this genius? And I'm like, do they know what the USSR is? Like, do those songs okay, full disclosure, I do not care about the Beatles, I do not care about the Rolling Stones. Life started in 1996, but I think there's some beautiful Beatles songs. I'm not trying to say Let It Be isn't like a heartbreaker. It's incredible. But songs like Help, I just don't really care about. And this movie really plays on Danny Boyle's memory of the genius or his experience as a young man hearing these songs in England. And it's a charming movie because it's personal. It's also bullshit because it's like...
Go off.
It's like bringing... Who should be the victim here? Bill Russell. You know, who's Beatles-esque, like bigger than Jesus. Bill Russell is the god with a capital G, right? Like 11 championships, undeniably one of the greatest players of all time. I'm not trying to deny that. But you bring him into an era of young fans who play video games, who know about LeBron James and Michael Jordan, and he's not quite the same Bill Russell as the Bill Russell that existed, I believe, in the 60s, right?
Well, we're talking about the time machine test, right? Because that's the premise of yesterday here.
Mm-hmm. And
it is that this person doesn't just happen to grow up X amount of years later. He's teleported, right?
Oh, no, this person is just a songwriter who is one of the few people on Earth who remember who the Beatles were.
But I'm saying that's the time machine.
Oh, yeah, it's a time machine premise, but it's different because it's not like Back to the Future where you're taking sports bets. This is an aesthetic calculation, right? So this is like, there's one scene where he tries to play Let It Be to his parents, and they keep on interrupting him, and he loses his patience, and he says, "You're ruining the first time you're going to hear this song. Like, do you realize the beauty of what I'm about to bestow onto you?" And I'm like, oh, that's a really weak idea in my point of view, because Let It Be sung by your son, who's a failed songwriter, in your living room doesn't really quite have the right framing. And the movie didn't talk enough about context and aesthetic, like evolution. If we're just talking about who's going to win an election, there's an evolution there built in as well, but that's just knowing a result. My argument is if you bring songs into a different context, they have a different meaning.
I mean, the argument that's being made by that film is that great art is great art no matter when it comes out, and that it has attributes which have universal appeal. Mm-hmm. And it sounds to me that you are saying, why would that be true? Why would it be true that if someone wrote the greatest pop song of all time and then I just croon it right now over the Cookies Hoops podcast,
and let's say you had a
recognized
beautiful voice,
as the most brilliant pop song?
Yeah.
Of course not.
No.
You know, and we were talking about this yesterday, that if no one had ever seen Vince Carter's dunks, and you forgot that he existed, and you watched him dunk next to a high schooler today, you would not say Vince Carter was the greatest dunker of all time.
No. And I know, and that's a good point, because that is not about who wins a championship. The dunk contest is kind of an aesthetic experience.
Although I will say, to Vinsanity's credit, who we spoke a lot about yesterday, he is still the best in-game dunker by far. No one is doing better dunks than Vince, even 20 years later.
Well, he was good enough to have the opportunity, because Desmond Mason had some dunks, but he wasn't good enough to have enough.
Like Gerald Green.
Oh my God!
There are guys who have had amazing in-game dunks, but Vince,
Nate Robinson, woo!
Vince like doing 360s in traffic and stuff. Like no one did some of the degree of difficulty, but with like the power and elevation. Vince was just a different specimen when it came to in-game dunking. Yeah. But what he did in his famous dunk contest, again, high schoolers today are doing stuff way harder than that. Yeah,
and I like this conversation when there's no games, because we're talking about like the beauty of it or the aesthetics of it, and who had the prettiest in-game dunks. And I kind of think like I love thinking about music that way and making lists and comparing eras, because it's easier. The evolution of health and biometrics and what we know about statistics makes basketball a really tough sell for that discussion. In that sense, I mean, we try endlessly.
You know, there's a podcast called Reply All, and they had a episode recently that was about a guy who had a song in his head from when he was a teenager. And he went to try to find it online, and there's no evidence. He can't find it. He Googles the lyrics, there's really nothing. No one has heard of it. And the whole podcast, which I will not spoil because it's a very good listen, and I know people need things besides this podcast to listen to. So I'm not going to reveal, you know, what happens over the course of the hour-long pod. It's a gripping listen. But that premise of forgotten basketball players, of forgotten ideas, that is one of those things that does sort of haunt me about the NBA. That we can look at the modern game today and say, oh, there are elements of the past in it. But we've forgotten how good, say, like Mookie Blaylock was.
Oh,
There's just
BPM God.
But he's awesome. He was a fantastic player, just a wonderful player. There isn't the kind of footage of him available that there are of modern players. He's never talked about. He wasn't on a championship team. There's no one who's going to sing Mookie Blaylock's praises for being a phenomenal player on a public stage. And as we get further and further away, as we are from, say, like the Spanish flu in 1918, there are less people who remember it. There are less people around to advocate for the greatness of Mookie Blaylock. And he will just go down as someone who played basketball with a cool first name, instead of being one of the best players of his era and a guy who was like an original kind of 3-and-D combo guard who could shoot, who could defend, who could pass, you know, like a really special player who was very modern, but we just don't care about anymore.
Well, he will always be relevant as long as Pearl Jam is relevant, which is hilarious, which is sports related because your buddy uses Pearl Jam to intro his podcast. The original name was Mookie Blaylock because it was an interesting like collection of letters. I saw them play once and they had all the starting lineup, a bunch of starting lineup figures on their amps, you know, those action figures of NBA players, which are so awesome. If you go to eBay now and you look at them, they're only like, some of them are $2 or $3 in the package still. They're so cool. There was a summer where I just bought a bunch of them. But anyway, yeah, memory is weird. I think DeJuan Wagner is going to be an up-and-coming baller, and he's underrated. And that was like 20 years ago. You know, like my memory doesn't serve me, do justice to some of these players. And
another thing that's interesting is how guys who are marginal stars today, we will have every play that they ever had on an NBA court will be immortalized.
Good.
As long as we have society. And that is a fantastic thing.
Yeah,
but it will also sit there unwatched. You know?
Yeah. I mean,
the New York Times is available in its entirety online. You can find any article that was written ever. But when's the last time you went back and read an article from 2002?
You talking microfiche? We're talking about microfiche?
It's all there, but it just sits there, hidden in plain view.
But that's not how resources work, right? Like, it's not the totality, the total use of resources at our hands. Like, I just watched that movie Spotlight, and a lot of it's about the Boston Globe, the BMM, uncovering like one of the biggest stories of our generation about the Catholic Church.
I like that movie Spotlight is phrased as the handiwork of the Boston media mafia.
I mean, literally, right? Like,
put down that Jason Tatum exclusive. There's abuse in Catholicism.
Yo, the Red Sox are a reoccurring theme there. They talk about it's framed around the Red Sox success, but I think, you know, they uncovered journalistic nuggets that had been sitting in a dusty warehouse for a decade, and that's kind of, you know, I've always
turn off that episode of Spencer Confidential.
Is Mark Wahlberg in this movie? I just want to know. Does he save the day? But I think like I was talking to somebody who was majoring in library studies, getting a master's in library studies, and we were talking about Vine. I think we've talked about it here. It's like, what a shame that platform went under without someone archiving it, because that was a moment in time that I really am curious to go back to and look at. But right, to your point, if it was archived, would I, or would I just be like, done? I am not a record collector. I don't collect vinyl records. I'm not a completionist. I wish I was, because I think there's meaning in that experience. And I see my friends who look for records, and I think there's a joy there that I wish I had that I don't. But there's like a human instinct to complete an archive of some sort, and I just don't have that. But I'm glad someone else does, so I can like ask our buddy if that record sounds good, because I can't find it on YouTube.
Yes, I agree with that. But yeah, that episode of Reply All, if you're looking for things to listen to, it is about that. It is about something that haunts you from your past that you can't find.
Yeah.
And that sometimes happens when we're talking about basketball. There are plays you remember, and you're just like, it was too far. It was too far in the past. Yeah. You can't find it. If it was 2 years ago, you could hunt down the exact play and find it. But right now, if you wanted it, unless someone else went and managed to carve it out and put it up on YouTube, very difficult to find.
I do an art project with my buddy Pascal called Schritz, and basically it's kind of along the lines of this premise. It's all these artists that we love, that we think about, that we feel are gone from, or disappearing from my consciousness, either because they're dead or people don't pay attention to them or they stop making work. And we try to make hats and T-shirts and basically concert merch or a gift shop merch for people to wear, to remember that we can go back and experience these wonderful paintings, and just reminding people and keeping them alive, sort of like a meme. If you think a meme is alive, it has to be fed by talking about it.
Well, besides going back and listening to this pod and watching this movie yesterday, at least there's some good music out.
Ooh. Oh.
New music, since we're talking about leaving the past in the dust where it belongs.
A couple of really futuristic albums and a couple of old school bangers.
So there's been a wealth of new music, specifically new rap, that's come out over the last week or so. Notably, Lil Baby's My Turn, along with Lil Uzi, who put out Eternal Take, and then an addition upon that to give it like something like 40 songs yesterday that was called, was it Love vs. the World Part 2? Mm-hmm. And then you also have the long-awaited, for literally a decade, Jay Electronica album, A Written Testimony, which features Jay-Z prominently. It might even be like Jay Electronica, like Jay, Jay-Z Electronica, as far as I could tell, because he's all over the album. I wasn't sure what the project was, but apparently it's on Rock Nation, and it really is just I listened to it. It's them together. It's not just a Jay Electronica album.
The tradition of people, rap Twitter, tweeting new Jay lyrics and be like, the God, is like a whole vibe. People will just like grab anything Jay says and be like, can you believe he's still at it? What a king. I'm like, I don't know.
They were everywhere yesterday.
Yeah.
The thing came out at midnight, and I remember looking at Twitter, and I was like, I don't know what any of these things mean. It must be Jay-Z.
Right. I mean, Denzel Washington gif, but I was like, does Jay have coronavirus? Like, he's not quite in the risk group, but he's not quite not either. But yeah, these albums were really awesome to have all kind of in the same week.
Well, let's talk about the Jay Electronica one, since you're on it right now. I was never someone who was a Jay Electronica apostle.
That's a good word for it.
I think he's a good rapper. Yeah. I was never someone who was like, when is this going to come out? I would always listen to it if it came out. Whenever he'd put a new song out, I would eventually check it out.
It appeals
But I was
to
never
a certain
like
fan.
I was never waiting on Jay Electronica.
Nor was I. He was the MySpace era a little bit, right? Like Eternal Sunshine came out on MySpace, I think. It's a long time ago, man.
I'm trying to think. Is that the Arctic Monkeys era with
That's a good band.
Lily Allen?
Also a good singer.
That was very MySpace era.
It's cool, man. And he appeals to something that I don't quite understand, which is he's very wordy. He's very lyrical. I think he speaks to his truth quite a bit. He seems a bit like a mansplainer to me. He's very religious. I wouldn't classify it as fun music. I would classify it as like he's trying to take me to school kind of stuff. He's very serious, and that doesn't make some of his jams not great, but he just never was in my world.
You don't want someone who's trying to kick knowledge.
No, I do not.
His one with Just Blaze, that was Exhibit A, right?
I think so.
That's a great record. Awesome beat.
Transformations.
Love him rapping about being on like Mezzarole and not having a slice of pizza. Yeah, I've been there, man.
He's from New Orleans though, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, we squashed with the last Cookies merch drop. We squashed regional beef forever, so we don't even have to talk about where they're from.
Look, when you can get a Greenpoint reference into a rap song, I say go for it.
It's pretty charming, man. Shea Matant. What does he run with Shea Matant?
I don't know, something about Elijah Muhammad.
Right, like he's part of the Nation of Islam.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
It's interesting hearing Jay-Z, the foremost rap capitalist, aside someone who is shouting out Nation of Islam. And as you said, kicking knowledge in a way that Jay scorned Nas for doing on The Takeover. Like, he made fun of Nas for creating the exact same type of content that he is now rapping alongside. For the most part, Jay-Z sticks to his, solid gold guns.
He's a
like,
businessman.
It's really that stuff. He's like, why wouldn't I have a watch like a Saudi prince? Like, he's not making excuses. Oh, I take that back. He kind of is making excuses, but it's in that way of like, you didn't keep that same energy for the DuPonts and the Carnegies. It's like him explaining why he did the NFL deal.
Right. Which is fine. I mean, as you get older, you kind of care less and less about that stuff, I think.
And then the other hand, you've got Jay Electronica talking about like my Umi and, Satan struck Palestine with another mortar.
Yeah, it's very serious. It's I have not revisited like Sons of God or Sons of Man. What is that? A tertiary Wu-Tang group?
Yeah. I mean, I think people who are younger may not understand how prominent like Nation of Islam or like Nation of Gods and Earth's content was in East Coast rap from the 90s.
Yeah.
It was very, very prominent, from Wu-Tang to Brand Nubian, X-Clan. It was a big part of rap.
Yeah, the Native Tongues crew, I think, was involved in it would hijack some rappers. Some like rappers would find out about it and be radicalized and start making art about it, and it was cool, but some of it was not cool. And religion is a fantastic thing that helps us. So like, I don't know. Sometimes I just don't like the songs.
Yeah, I mean, you had guys like Tragedy Gaddafi too. It really went from like, Queen's thug rap to sort of, as you were saying, like kicking knowledge, like Wisdom. Mm-hmm. Nas had stuff that referenced it. It was just a very big part of East Coast rap.
Did J-Rue fall into there? I don't know, man. It's a long time ago. But hearing Jay Electronica's record this week was comforting in a way, in a time when we need as much comfort as we can get, maybe. And it's not a bad record. It's just not for me. And I think people are just freaking out about it because they finally have it. But I was not waiting.
I listened to it with a pretty much open mind. As I said, I was not someone who was saying, oh, I can't wait for this guy. I had no expectations, none, and I didn't even know Jay-Z was on it as much as he is.
Well, he signed to Rock Nation in 2010.
Yeah,
right? It was a big deal. Like, oh, they got Jay Electronica.
I think the album is good. I like it. It is exactly as you would expect. It's boom bappy. It's him talking about Egypt and Jay talking about money. Jay does sound enlivened though, and I mean Jay-Z in that way. He's got some
coffee.
He's got some spunkiness to him where he knows he's a good rapper, and I think despite being 50 years old is like, all right, let me pull the tube socks up, like check ball. I'm gonna give it my all out here for the next like 39-minute album.
Yeah. And I'm here for Jay-Z's turn to like rapping about his age and his death. There's a lot of verses on this album where he talks about his legacy, and in the sense that he's old. He's always talked about his legacy, but I think it's interesting that emo take for Jay is something I'm absolutely welcome for. Like, Bob Dylan had all these crazy albums, and there's some good, some bad. And then he put out Time Out of Mind that talked about his death, and it was pretty good. It won, I think, the Grammy for Best Album. And I'm waiting for Jay's turn towards like his kind of philosophical, like spiritual kind of turn.
He's had those kind of records though in the past, like Lucky Me, and the first album, Reasonable Doubt, was all sort of a mournful musing about the people that he'd taken advantage of because he had to.
But as you get older, it
like
takes
the
this
Evils,
tone, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, as he's actually standing there as a 50-year-old, he's like, oh, I'm a different person than I was when I made Reasonable Doubt, and let me tell you about it. Like, I'm ready for that, Jay. Maybe.
There are times when I might have said Jay-Z is the best rapper of all time.
You mean for a solid decade?
I'm saying I might say that now, whatever. I just mean,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah, he's that great. I've never really believed him.
Whoa, how so?
The Jay has always struck me as someone who is very incredibly gifted and talented and calibrated and always has an agenda. And he's being personal when he wants to be personal and you to say Jay is being personal. Okay. That I've never been able to sort of take Jay out of the cycle of how he wants to be viewed, how he wants to be perceived by fans and critics and his peers. And I don't really know what Jay-Z actually is like or what he thinks in a genuine way.
Do you need that for your artwork?
No, and that's why I think he's great. But that's the one thing about him is that I've never really view anything he says as 100% genuine. Right. Well, and art does not need to be 100% genuine because that's just my opinion.
Yeah,
maybe Jay-Z is like, no, I was 100% genuine. And I'm like, oh, okay.
And I always have to remind myself that he was like a child star. He had been a gifted rapper as a young teenager, and he was groomed to do this. And sometimes to your point, sometimes his experience, his personal experience, could seem very orchestrated because he's been in this pipeline forever. His youth was about being a rapper and being a better rapper than the next rapper. So, he talks about Marcy Projects and his experience growing up quite a bit and dealing drugs. But I think the art was his life. Do you know what I mean?
What I love about Jay is that he is obscenely gifted at rapping and insists that he's not a rapper. I'm a businessman. Like, dude, you're the best rapper and you've always wanted to rap, and you clearly get really competitive about it. And there are stories of him when he was first coming up going and battling like DMX, at a barber shop. And like DMX. Jay wanted to be a rapper more than anything. And he also created this idea that like, I'm not a rapper, I'm a hustler. I just happen to rap.
He's correct. He's 1,000% correct in that.
I mean, he is a hustler, but Jay is just such a brilliant rapper. And that's why he's been able to stay relevant for so long, that he never sounds or rarely sounds completely washed on a track. It happens, but he's always been able to sort of gather himself and come back. And like, he sounds really good on this record. And we've never had a rapper that sounded good at 50 years old.
I'm holding out for like Rick Ross. But I did not wake up.
He's literally 50.
I know. J-Lo's age, right? I didn't wake up thinking I'd be standing for Jay-Z today, because I have not been in this mind space for a decade. But there was a decade where it's kind of all I cared about. Like, like
same.
I just hung on his every word, and we all move on, and he moved on to bigger things like he took a management role. He had other artists in his tutelage become great, like Kanye West. He started representing athletes. All these things to a lot of success. He was a part owner of the Nets for a while, a symbolic owner, which is quite an achievement, man. But I have not cared about his rapping for a long time.
Same. And there was a long period of time, where even if Jay-Z's album wasn't great, he was so great that it sounded like time stopped when he started rapping.
100%.
Like, okay, Jay's talking, hold on.
Yeah. And then you would just giggle with excitement. I remember, I think I bought the Blueprint 2 on Canal Street, and I had a studio near there, and the UPS guy dropped off a box, and I was playing it, and he was like, "Is this the Blueprint 2?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he just stayed there for 4 songs, and we were just giggling. He was like, "Oh man, this is as good as I thought it was. Which guy did you get it from?" I'm like, "Worcester." Like I just named the corner, and he's like, "I'm going right now." He's like, "I could get fired today, but I need this record for tonight." It was
yeah,
like
I had volume 3 on bootleg, and I remember listening to it at my buddy's spot up in Harlem, and just having it on repeat over and over and over, and being like, "This guy is he's the best."
He's the best.
I don't even like these beats. Now that album sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But he was just in the zone as far as being a rapper. He had that incredible moment where he was still talking slick. He was still very arrogant. He hadn't reached this like billionaire plateau where everything was coached in like I'm now old money. He was still, you rich, take the do-rag off. It was that era.
Yeah,
and you're like, it was the perfect combination of like wordplay and, era viste.
Sense of humor. He was funny.
Yeah. Yes. He was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. That volume 3 J, he was just so in the zone.
Talk about in the zone. Could we talk about these Lil guys? Lil Baby and Lil Uzi Vert?
The guards.
Yeah. They are so good right now. I'm very excited for them. There are 2 releases that came out this week. Well, Uzi, retired last year. But not in the this is our farewell MSG show, psych. He retired in that he's like, wink wink, I'm gonna take a break. And we were just waiting for these albums to come out. And
I mean, he's also only 25.
I mean, it's awesome marketing, whatever. It's something to write about. And artists get frustrated, and he got very famous very quick at a young age, and I bet you he's exhausted. But thankfully not too exhausted.
So yes, there are about 40 new songs from him that have come out in the last week in sort of the format of 2 separate albums. I just listened to the latest one today because I think it came out last night. I think it's great.
It's so fantastic. Did you listen to Eternal Take?
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, I
think I like the new ones better though.
It's like joyful music. It's musical. It's beautiful. He's good at rapping. It feels new. The one where he stares at the moon and wonders where the pizza bully is a really fantastic track. But I think I had the same feeling when I first heard the last Billie Eilish record, which is it's a pop record at this point, and it was manufactured that way, but it felt like this new generation had hit its stride, and they were everything was kind of coming together for her in the same way it came together for Uzi 5 years ago, and now it's coming together for him again. And I can't believe you just said he's only 25, because I would have guessed 30, because he's been good for a long time. But I think
I think Lil Uzi follows in the lineage of Thug, Lil Wayne, where they use their voice as an instrument in really unique ways. that it just sort of bobs and weaves. And Uzi specifically added that, early 2000s emo sound, which I think separates him a little bit from those other guys who are clearly influences of his and heroes. And that's something that he has kind of brought to rap. And we heard other artists like Juice WRLD adopt some of those same cadences because they're the same age or the same age group.
Yeah, always shout out to Young Thug, who was the Cookies Artist of the Decade, I believe.
A huge award.
Yeah.
And I know he was really proud to have received that.
Always.
But there is a downside to Uzi because he's really good at rapping.
What?
And as I said, he uses his voice so musically. I do feel like sometimes he just throws in like raunchy stuff.
Oh, okay, fair.
For no reason and with no context. And it makes it like awkward to listen to around people.
Like objectifying people's mothers?
No, it's like if you're doing a sex song or you're doing a line, it's like he just throws in lines all the time. It's just like, your girl on her knees, S and the D. And you're like, wait, that's not even what the song is about. You just threw it in there.
Fair enough.
And I am totally down with people saying whatever you want. Yeah. It's just more of like, I'm just going to put this on in the car. Drive around. You're like, man, that line really came out of nowhere. And then he does it like 20 times a song.
Yeah.
So again, I'm a big fan of Uzi. I think he's a great rapper. I think his new albums are really good. The only thing is like some of the stuff is a little tricky to play at mixed company.
I agree. It has a danger or maybe like an embarrassment factor there, and he timestamps his music in a way. I just want to bring Lil Baby into this because I think they're kind of. We can talk about them at the same time. In that the Lil Baby record, I think, is my favorite of the three because not only does it have all the elements of the Uzi record, but it's like so melancholy and really describes this emo thing that you're talking about that was big 10 years ago. It's like not only is it beautiful, but it's very sad, and it doesn't have these jokey moments that Uzi kind of throws in, where it kind of like reminds you of where you are. It's like, oh, I'm sitting here listening to an album on my phone, where like the Baby record kind of it takes you somewhere else.
What I like about rap in general is that, for the most part, since its creation, it has been a meritocracy, and in that way, it's one of the reasons we like basketball. It gives you this hierarchy that you can argue. It's based on being good at something. Mm-hmm. But rap is art, so it's also more malleable. It's also more ambiguous. But I do think you can look at someone like Lil Baby that, is a new rapper and that maybe older people don't really listen to as much. And he's very, very, very good at rapping. And it's the same way that Lil Uzi is great at rapping and Thug is great at rapping. Woo. And even though people who are boomer adjacent bemoan the lack of like skill and lyricism and they love Jay Electronica coming back, these new guys are so good at what they do. It's like, Buckshot Shorty was doing like one-handed tomahawk dunks, and these guys are skill-wise dunking between both legs, off the bounce, jumping over someone's head. A lot of these guys are so skillful. It's just a different style of skill that they're demonstrating. It's more musical. It's more about delivery. It may not be as intricate in terms of like the syllables like someone like Jay Electronica, but man, Lil Uzi, Lil Baby, they are fantastic.
And to that basketball analogy, I always think of the Jay-Z's as the dunkers, as the Vince Carters. Amazing, we love them. But I kind of see Baby and Uzi in a different light. I see them as Ben Simmons and Lonzo Balls. We're like, oh, we don't really dunk, but we don't care about dunking. We don't care about shooting threes because I don't like shooting threes. I do what I want. It's like a deeply Zoomer mentality that is like really producing some great artwork and some great players. And I see them as rapping geniuses almost. And that would, I think a lot of backpackers would bristle against that, being like, but there's auto-tune and they're not rhyming and they're just talking about like stuff. They're not talking about religion and these heavy topics. I'm like, yeah, they've modernized all of that and streamlined it to an even more perfect box.
For sure. And they are, in many times, far more experimental than the rappers of the past, especially ones who abided by the 90s East Coast ethos of boom bap. I mean, some of the beats that Uzi picks are just ridiculous.
Yo, the Lil Baby production is fantastic. It's just so good and so subtle. It like makes me think of like FKA Twigs and
the beat that Uzi raps over that Pierre did on this one with Young Nudie, Money Spread. It's not rap beats that sound like that. I don't even think it's a great beat.
Yeah.
It's just some other shit.
He's got some trance stuff in there. He's got
exactly.
It's Uzi is super joyful, and then when I hear the Baby record, I'm like, oh, this one like really like it hits me a little different. Like I'm gonna be thinking about the Baby record a little bit, which is funny because Da Baby put out a record that I loved from last year, but that really leaned into this boom bap, this fat beats kind of vibe more, and I was really open. Or I was really happy about it because he was funny and he was so good at it. And there was a progression there. But the Lil Baby record just really, it kind of crushes me a little bit, man.
I love how broken he sounds.
Yeah,
There's
dude.
some roastness to his delivery.
Yeah.
And this world-weary sense from someone who's really young, who's still boasting about the things that he has. And maybe that's a product of Future kind of creating that idea, just influence wise of like all this money record. And all these women and all this jewelry. It just can't make me happy.
Yeah,
I've seen too much.
It's a great look, and it makes me think of Juice WRLD, your boy, and Lil Peep, and all that stuff. And there's a little bit of tragedy in this record, just because we know what his peers went through. And it's worth mentioning how young these guys are and who their idols are. And it's that same way as Thug,
within basketball.
Yeah.
Like, who did you look up to? Like, oh, wait, rookies look up to Devin Booker.
Yeah, because we talk about this. The formative years between 15 and 18 are really tight, and a lot happens in that age when you get the Maple Mamba going to the draft with a patch on the inside of his coat. And they're like, so what do you like about Kobe? He's like, oh, I don't know Kobe. That's way before my time. But I know about Mamba mentality because that's like a cultural signifier, right?
Like in rap, we're 2 generations behind Chief Keef as your main influence.
Yo, Tyler the Creator is an old head. It's Earl Sweatshirt is old, man.
No, it's 100% true. It was like Keef influenced Odd Future and like the Brooklyn drill scene and like the sing-song, almost like atonal crooning, and that was like 10 years ago,
dude. It's so sad. I remember seeing Odd Future without Earl, obviously, at Santo's party house and standing in the back. You were probably right next to me with a bunch of old heads, and he was like, "Old heads to the back." I'm like, "We are. Don't worry. We're here already. Like, we know the rules of this whole thing. We still love you, but we're back here."
I remember being with Tyler the Creator and Odd Future, sans Earl Sweatshirt, who was still in hiding at that time, and going with them to write a story. And I traveled them to South by Southwest, and this was their first kind of exposure on the mainstream. Before, they had been only online. We knew who they were. They had a few interviews. We'd heard the music. At that point, I think only Earl had an EP out and like Tyler had an EP out, or maybe he had an album, but there was not a lot of content other than a few songs, but they were already a phenomenon. And to be with them at South by, shout out to cancel last South by, it was like being with the biggest stars on the planet, because this is of course an indie music festival. It's a very of the moment, and these guys were just exploding on that scene. So we would get out of a truck.
I love that
and
wave,
have to like
man.
run down streets in Austin with people chasing us.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to be too redundant, but it's incredible to think about that being. They were kids.
Yeah.
They were kids, and then you look now and you're like, as you said, Tyler is like an older, influential, like reputable artist, when their entire thing back then was upending the establishment and being
Yeah.
completely new and a shock to the system.
Yeah. I feel like I have to defend time a little bit here because you're right in that these young ballers are like, oh, I grew up watching Devin Booker. That's like a misrepresentation of time because the way the way people grow up, like a lot happens in a few years. And, it's easy for someone to say like, this is in and this is out and have it immediately be true. Like someone will say like, I grew up watching Zion Williamson. I'm like, right, because you grew up last year. Like, it doesn't really compute in terms of time.
Yes, a basketball generation is like 5 years.
Or 2, right? Like, Ja Morant might be like, who's Gary Payton? Or he might be like, I grew up watching Lonzo Ball. And that's true. He did grow up watching Lonzo Ball. Because he's growing up.
No, it's the same thing with rap that we're talking about.
Yeah, totally.
That, a rapper who's just coming out today is like, oh, I grew up listening, Juice WRLD, grew up listening to Lil Uzi.
Yeah. And this is the opposite of kind of like the net neutral thing we always talk about or the centrist kind of art or basketball player.
Did you grow up watching Tobias Harris?
Who's like a young centrist? Who's Lil centrist? In the draft, is it RJ Barrett?
He's a centrist.
He's a centrist. But it makes me think how much I actually value experimentation and weirdness over what I just love to experience. And Uzi is kind of in the middle of that because I think Uzi is still experimental. But he's so polished at this point where it's almost undeniable. You could just play him in a supermarket, or not the spiciest songs, but some of his songs you can play in the supermarket, and I don't think many people would blink. With some other experimental music, and I think that's why people hold on to the sound of punk so much, or emo, because whether it's not accepted by a larger community or it's actually still experimental, it's hard to tell. But I think Lil Baby has a little bit of that where it kind of demands you to pay attention in a different way than Uzi does, who is kind of like the best party album scenario.
I don't know how these albums will age. I don't know if we'll view albums as classics in that same way we used to. There was a consensus when an album would come out that sort of the critical voices would assign something the stature of classic, and then we would argue about it. And I don't know if that still happens because, the evolution of the album, for the example of Lil Uzi, he just added another 15 songs or 20 songs. Like, okay, cool, now it's 40 songs, or it's 2 albums, or it's bonus tracks. There's just such ambiguity in what even is an album. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that people are very into this Jay Electronica record, because Jay is old enough that Jay does albums. And Uzi puts out tons of music.
Yeah.
Future puts out music all the time. But with someone like Jay-Z, he still believes in those sort of boomer ways of putting out albums. Like, your first one's got to be a classic. And then, the second one is your commercial one. And then that doesn't do as well. And the third one, you get the streets back. And it's like this and then at some point, you're forced to do a mixtape. The hierarchy of how you put together albums. And Jay Electronica is someone who clearly abides by that thing where it's like,
took him 10 years, man.
Dude, it's honestly, dude, it's like, that's a 39-minute album where Jay did, I would say half the rapping. Like, you guys could have done that in an afternoon. Like, literally, you could have done that in an afternoon.
Have you ever experienced writer's block? Like, for real? As a writer, I'm asking you, I know you're an accomplished writer. Have you ever experienced that, like, deeply?
I wouldn't say so, because I also don't write fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I could see someone who is writing a story, a book, saying, I don't know where to go from here. I've just hit this wall. For me, I'm typically writing about things. I can always adjust quotes or move them around. There's always something I can do to scramble things up and make it a little more easy to dive back into.
As a painter who does a little bit of writing, I think I can isolate 2 times that I've had legit writer's block, and it felt so lonely. It was crazy. It's just like sitting there, just making bad thing after bad thing, and then like covering it with more paint. It was tough, and I knew it wasn't a unique experience, but it really created kind of like a sympathy that I have for other artists who maybe like don't put out a second album that's good or a third album that's good, that maybe have one hit. And I've never had a hit in life, but like I think
you had a viral tweet the other day. That was pretty good.
Taking down the NCAA, chase that hypocrisy, boys. But you know what I mean. It's like it's a really lonely place to occupy as someone without a deadline, without any resource other than yourself. And I don't know how to quite describe it, but when Jay Electronica takes 10 years to make a record that seems like it would have taken a night for Uzi, shout out to Jay Electronica, man. It must have been hard.
Yeah, I'm not knocking him
No.
for his inability to put out an album.
Yeah.
I'm more saying somehow they managed to put together 39 minutes from this dude who was unable to put out an album for the last decade.
Yeah.
And hey, let's just say this, though. For all the people who are working at home for the first time and are now in what you described as the lonely place, it's not going to be easy.
No.
As Adrian Chen wrote or tweeted yesterday, it's like, you're going to turn feral.
Yeah.
You're going to have 3 days of like bathing.
You're going to turn into Anthony Davis on the Pelicans, just like snorting around for any truffle you can possibly find under your couch
The
in your
classic
computer
feral
archives.
big.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is, if you are now working at home and you're unsure how to adjust to this new reality, what you want to do is listen to a lot of Cookie Soups. You want to get out and take a walk.
Yep. Wash your hands.
Wash your hands.
Don't freak out.
Go out and have some lunches, have some dinners at restaurants. Get out of the house. That doesn't mean that you can like necessarily hit the club.
Don't go to a packed arena for Post Malone in Colorado.
No, don't do that.
But pick up some food from your favorite restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, I got a couple texts from people last night being like, you coming to this like party?
You want a ball? I'm going to a run. Let's go.
I was a bit shocked, but I also had a lot of respect.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. I'm torn with the James Dolan thing. Do we act like life goes on and we shouldn't be scared, or do we act like this is an acute thing?
What I'm advocating is don't pretend life is that different, but don't do dumb shit.
I think that's reasonable.
Like,
that
don't
goes
go
for
see
every
Post
day a little
Malone.
bit. Yeah.
The Post Malone thing is no. Don't go like walk into a highway of traffic. Don't do those things.
Yeah, the wrestling is gonna happen, but if you're a wrestling fan, maybe consider just watching it on TV for the next 2 weeks.
But go get a burger and a beer, and make sure you wash your hands.
Yeah, a veggie burger and a non-alcoholic beer. Oh, a claw maybe.
Oh man, I was off those claws and started like wiping my hands on everything, touching my face. Oh,
I love
like a claw.
cookies. I love cookies.
well, you are now subjected to 4.5 hours of cookies over 3 days. I hope it's enough for you.
I hope it's enough for you.
Never be enough.
Cookies.
Cookies.